the wrong tune in the wrong key. Gig nightmares for you and me. Song changed keys and I wasn't ready. Gig nightmares for you and me. Another key change, oh God, oh no. Gig nightmares for you and me.
All right, Gig Nightmares. Here we are today with Mr. Matti Frost. How you doing today?
I'm good. It's been a crazy day, but I'm starting to relax and unwind a little bit.
There you go. So from what you were telling me, just like a little bit of background info on you. Since 2013, you've been the singer, rhythm guitar player, and main songwriter for Frost Giant, based out of Philly. You've been doing that since 2013. You were the former drummer for a metalcore band from Philly called Live Fast Die.
Yep.
You were the drummer of a central Pennsylvania band called The Commercials, where you actually did some touring in Canada, which
Oh, yeah.
leads to some of your gig nightmares that I'm excited to hear about. And then you were also in Connecticut playing in several bands in the DIY punk scene, which, naturally has fun stories there. Playing house shows, fire halls, and, every now and then actual clubs.
Yeah, once in a while we played a club.
Awesome. So, let's just get right into it. I'm really curious to hear about, what I've just been thinking of the Canadian Disaster Tour.
Oh, the whole thing, except maybe one show, everything was just one tragedy after another. You couldn't write this into like something scripted by Ricky Gervais. It was that bad, just horrible things happening left and right. First of all, we couldn't get into the country. We got to the border. Our bass player at the time had a DUI that had been expunged from his record. He went through the rehabilitation and everything, but for some reason they knew about it and they weren't going to let us into the country because of that.
I've heard about that happening before. Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't just because of that. Maybe it was just the overall vibe. They just didn't want to let us in or whatever because we were like a band or whatever. And I don't know. They just didn't want to deal with it. So we had to go to another border crossing. I think we tried to get in Niagara Falls and we got turned away. But we did manage to get in at Buffalo. And by then we were late. We were too late for the first show. We didn't make it. And the second show, I think, was also a wash. There's supposed to be 7 or 8 shows booked, and we only ended up playing 4 or 5. One of them wasn't even really booked, or rather they said it was booked, but when we got there, the club didn't know what was going on. They had no idea that a band was even supposed to play. And we had driven for days and slept in parking lots and truck stops with mosquitoes just tearing us apart. I don't know if people who've never been to Canada know this, but the mosquitoes in the summertime, I don't know. I don't know what's up with that.
Oh, geez, that's awful.
Yeah, it's I would expect this in the rainforest or the jungle, but in Canada, oh my God, crazy. I slept on a tent and one of those dome tents, but it was on a concrete parking lot, in a truck stop, and it was not comfortable. So the next day when we rolled up to the venue, they were like, oh, we don't know. I was like, listen, you don't understand the situation I've been in. We need to play a show or I'm going to lose my mind. And we played to 4 people and, they took pity on us, but it was really bad. But then as we were traveling to that place, that was near Thunder Bay, I believe, our guitar player had been worried about his grandfather who was ailing. He was in ill health, and sure enough, within a couple of days, he passed away. So he had to fly out of Winnipeg to go to his grandfather's funeral, and then he picked back up with us in Regina, and that was a funny thing too with the border crossing, because I didn't know it was pronounced Regina. I thought it was Regina. Why wouldn't I think it was Regina, right?
Yeah, I'm just learning that just now.
Yeah, well, the lady at the booth was I was like, oh, where are you going? I said, yeah, we're going to go to these couple cities and Regina. And she goes, it's Regina. And I went, oh, vagina? Everybody in the band's like, shh, don't be a dick. I was like, she was mean to me. So, yeah, I didn't know. I'd never been there. But, yeah, that was but that was not even the worst thing that happened. You would think like a death in the family and one of our members having to leave the tour and rejoin us a few days later would have been like, oh wow, that was the low point of the tour. We came into Edmonton and we were looking forward to playing the show. It was supposed to be this really big show, like a lot of like good local bands, and it was like an all-day thing. And we got there and it was like something horrible had happened the night before. There was a band from Edmonton at the time called Compromise, and they were on tour in the US with Seven Angels, Seven Plagues. They were in Louisiana, and they had gotten in a bad van wreck the night before, and two of their members died in a crash. Oh. And we were staying at their house. Like, it was like, you can't be upset or mad in that situation that your show is just going to go plummet through the roof, because why wouldn't it? But it was just the timing of it all was horrendous, and everybody was so bummed out. We played the show and we didn't know any of the bands or anything like that, but it was like, it was horrible. It was horrific. And, of course, you go through that mental cycle. Well, none of what we're going through is that bad. I mean, none of us have, perished on the road here, but that's one of those things that just reminds you when you are touring that, you're just one mistake away, or one bad turn away from disaster. We had a lot of good times on the tour too. None of it really revolved around the actual shows. Like, the scenery was great. Staying in Banff National Forest was really cool. We had to stay at a campground because there was no hotel spaces, and like out there's like bears and wolves, like just an elk the size of a van. So you don't want to mess with the wildlife out there. It's not like it is down in the States where you might, the worst you'll encounter is like a deer or a coyote or something. But out there, it's like there's things in the woods that will eat you. So, and there's not enough room. We were on tour with Me Without You. I didn't mention that earlier, but we were all touring in like one vehicle, and it was just so cramped. And you weren't going to be able to get like 9 sweaty dudes to stay in a van with the windows rolled up. So I'm like, screw it. I'm going to stay out in the tent. And if I get eaten by a bear, so be it. It won't be the worst thing that's happened on this tour. But, I did not get eaten by a bear. And the tour eventually ended. We came down and played the West Coast. And, everything sort of worked itself out as things do. I was a lot younger at the time. I was barely 30 years old. And it was like my first Canadian tour, but that whole experience, like the guy who had booked all the shows had never booked a tour before. So we were just kind of going out on a limb. It was a big DIY thing. And that's the roll of the dice you take when you just don't have a booking agent. And, like, we used to book our shows through like, Maximum Rock and Rolls, like Book Your Own Fucking Life books and stuff like that. Like we didn't really have like club connections or anything like that, not in the state, not in Canada anyway. And it was just really, you just gambled by the seat of your pants. And unfortunately, we came up snake eyes at almost every gig. And, to top it off, it's like when we finally got our act together, there was a local tragedy that was just, well, what are you going to do? Damn. So that whole tour was pretty much a nightmare, at least until we got back into the US. And even then it still wasn't great. We actually, that wasn't the tour we did with Zoloft. That was a different tour. But, yeah, I mean, you look back on it 25 years ago, and it's different because you're like, oh, well, hey, you remember those fond times. But when you're in it, you're just like, you hate everything. Oh, sure. You just get really gnarly about everything. And yeah. So that was the commercials experience. And there was a couple more like individual gigs throughout that whole, my whole tenure in that band of about 3 years, that some of them were good. A lot of them were really good. And some of them weren't great. And we would play a barn in Hershey, Pennsylvania, a literal barn. And we would play with like Zao and like these huge bands. This kid just had a big barn that he had a big PA system in, and it was crazy. Like the whole thing would shake. You'd have like 200, 300 kids bouncing around and going ape shit in there. And you just didn't know if you were going to die. You didn't know if the whole pile of timbers was just going to collapse. Like the parking, these kids' parents, I don't know what, like my parents would never, ever, ever let like hundreds of people just park on their lawn and hang out in their barn. and play metal until midnight, or punk or whatever it was. It was nuts, but I kind of wish things were like that still, I kind of wish we still had some of that stuff. Maybe we do somewhere, but I can't find it.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to find stuff like that. But I mean, I remember sometime as we were coming out of COVID, or when it was, I'm originally from Schuylkill County, so like kind of like middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. And my one friend, trying to do like folk punk sort of stuff, he would just get me and a bunch of like other people. Like I used to play like a little bit of folk punk, originals and whatever. And he had like this barn just literally in the middle of nowhere where he would just like throw shows like that. Now, obviously, like, with it being coming out of COVID, you couldn't have a whole lot of people there and whatever, just to mitigate. But like, yeah, every now and then, like you do find things like that. I unfortunately don't have as many DIY connections as I'd like, but I used to live in Philly, and I would just go see shows in like people's basements and whatnot. And like every now and then the cops would come and bust it up. But like, it's still just, it's such a unique sort of thing that you don't really, so many people just never get to really experience, for better and for worse.
That's where I kind of cut my teeth back in the, when I started playing shows in around 1990. Of course, that was still like the tail end of like the hair metal era, that's the kind of like hair and thrash metal, like even though there were different scenes, like a lot of those bands were still trying to come up through the music industry system at that time. It was like, Metallica had broken big and thrash metal was getting, major record deals and airplay. And so you didn't necessarily have to be like Guns N' Roses or Skid Row or Cinderella. You could be heavier, but you were still, you still had the majors that were interested in you. I remember all the bands got picked up, Anthrax, Testament, Megadeth. They were all, although those, they were all getting blowing up like crazy. We were in I was in a thrash band. That was my first real band. And we were, trying to play the clubs and everything and get in and do that whole route. And it was really tough. And we were in like some podunk, like the town I grew up in was not a music market. They had like 2 or 3 clubs and like, and by club, I mean dive bar with a PA, and the DIY thing was there, but, metal just wasn't a part of it. That was like the underground alternative scene at the time. And when that band just, broke up, I actually joined one of those bands, like, one of the heavier, sludgier, grungier bands. And that was my intro into the DIY scene. And I never wanted to look back. I had such a thing against the whole rock club aesthetic, because it was just such a dated, like, hierarchy pecking order thing that I didn't really care for. It's like, just, book a show, play a show, and, have a good time. It wasn't about, feeding drinks to people all the time. It was just about, it was you, the musician, the band, and the audience, face to face, not separated, and just interacting and feeding off of each other, and just having the best time possible. And that was what I came up with in the 90s. And that's when the first road trip I went on is the sort of segue into the next gig nightmare. So we went down to Nitro, West Virginia, and it sounds like what it is. It was a coal town in West Virginia, and it was definitely a unique place. It'd been my first time to West Virginia, which is a beautiful state. No shade being thrown on that. I love West Virginia. Mm-hmm. But it was just the venue was weird, and the vibe was weird. We were a 3-piece band, and 4-piece at the time, from like Mystic, Connecticut. A sea town in Connecticut, which has a reputation outside of Connecticut as being hoity-toity, ritzy. And we were in like the middle of West Virginia, where it was much more not Connecticut, to put it mildly. And we played a show at it was a storefront that had been converted into a venue. And the stage was made of like wood pallets on top of milk crates with plywood on top of it, but none of it was really secure. So the milk crates below would slide just due to the vibration and people moving around. So like the wood, the plywood would there would be gaps in the plywood. I think our guitar player actually almost put his foot through. Unfortunately, it wasn't that high. It was only like a foot maybe 16 inches from the ground, so he didn't break his ankle, but like he almost took a spill. There was a ska band that played that night, and like the whole brass section fell over. And fortunately we were a 4-piece, and we just played our show. But the best part of that, like the gig was fine. It was just, when you're in a punk band, you just assume everything's going to go off the rails and you're never disappointed. But when we were at the end of the gig, we stayed at a super great motel. Also, there was I don't know if it was a convention or just a bunch of people staying in town. Do you know those organizations where the Fraternal Order of such and such and it's usually an animal of some sort, and it's guys, right? It's these middle-aged guys, and I think they just don't want to be around their wives, so they have this own place where they can drink.
Sure. And
there's no women allowed, I guess. I don't know what this club was. I don't know what the purpose of these clubs are necessarily. But there were a bunch of men running around with these fur, and I don't mean just animal heads on top of their own heads, stark ass naked, running around outside. It's a motel. It's a Super 8 motel. So there's no there isn't a convention center. It's all outside, and they're running around on the balconies and out in the parking lot, drunk off their ass. Just naked except for whatever headdress they happen to be wearing. And it was one of the most surreal things I had ever seen in my life. It was something out of Twin Peaks or something. I had no idea what the hell was going on. And later that night we went for a snack, and I'm sitting in the van. I drove the van, and my guitar player's sitting in the back, and there's a guy outside. He's drunk, and he's just hippie van. Hippie van. Well, not a hippie van. It's totally not a hippie van.
Yeah.
He's like, what's in the hippie van? And then my guitar player just slams the sliding door. And then about 3 seconds later, you hear, why'd you slam the hippie door, hippie van? That's going to stay with me for the rest of my life. I will never forget that sentence. If I go mad in my old age, I will remember that sentence, and I'll be muttering it when I die.
When he was saying that, was it in an intimidating way? Because you're telling the story.
It wasn't like Warriors come out and play. The guy.
Oh.
He was really wasted, and he just kind of wanted to have a conversation, and we were just I'm not dealing with a drunk hillbilly at fucking midnight after we've seen naked people running around a hotel. It was just, yeah. So that was the one from way back in the day, where the gig wasn't necessarily a nightmare, but everything was super surreal.
Yeah, that sounds like some Eyes Wide Shut sort of thing.
Yeah, it really was. And we were young. I remember that was in 1995. So I was 23 years old when that happened. And it was just crazy. Yeah. But taking up to modern day times, I mean, Frost Giant's been playing shows since late 2012. And we've had a couple of doozies in our time, but the one that I want to focus on the most is this one. I don't know if you're familiar. Are you familiar with a venue in Allentown? It doesn't exist anymore, but it was called the Sterling Hotel.
Can't say I'm familiar.
Okay, well, Sterling Hotel was a small. It was a small room. They had two rooms. They had a big room and a small room, and the smaller room had the bar in it. It was very long. And the stage was in the back, and it was down the street from Crocodile Rock. That was open at the time.
Okay.
And they had stopped doing shows there for a while. The person who had booked the shows there had moved on to a different place. So this couple, I don't know who they were, but they wanted to bring back metal shows to the Sterling and to the Lehigh Valley, because ever since it had closed, there had been sort of a dearth of local metal bands playing in the city proper. So they asked us to play, and then there was a band at the time called Decasia, and two more bands, I think Since the Fire, who were still around, and a band called Chinga. And I was psyched. It was going to be my first show back in a while. I was recovering from laryngitis, and we put out all the stops. We invited so many people to come to this show, and we had people coming from as far away as Toms River, New Jersey to see us. It was really cool.
Nice.
There was a good turnout. And we were super stoked to get on there and just rip, right? We were really prepared for this show. And turns out that the Decasia who was I think it was Decasia who had to go and get their backup board, because the PA that the people had brought just it couldn't handle the power going through it, and it fried out. So Decasia, they went back to their practice space, which was like 45 minutes away. The show got delayed, but none of the other bands cut their set times. And that was the thing that was bothering me. It's like, every time when you're at a gig and things get off to a late start because of technical difficulties, and there's 4 bands playing, maybe just, cut a couple songs from your set to give everybody a chance to play, right? Do the right thing, help each other out. We were already kind of sharing equipment, but it wasn't happening. So every band that went on played for like an hour. It's like, you guys can't be doing this. And then Decasia went on, and the singer deliberately just fucked us completely. Like, they just kept playing and playing, and then the guy did like 2 encore songs, and one of them was a Pantera cover. So I'm like, oh, this is so not necessary. And we were going to try to get on there and just eke out 15 minutes, but the people at the bar just called it because it was like 1:30 in the morning.
Oh.
And we didn't get to play, and none of our people got to play. They didn't want to pay us because, we didn't make enough money. And it's like, you guys, these people didn't know what the fuck they were doing. To this day, we have not played a show in Allentown, and I live like, 20 minutes from there, and I'd love to play a show there. And they have some decent venues now that are sprouting up, and they've had a couple underground venues for a few years now. But it just seems to be like a cursed place for us. Like, we're so gun shy about it that our guitar player, Scott, doesn't even want to play. He doesn't even want to play in the Lehigh Valley because he thinks it's cursed. And I don't know what to tell him because, it's been a while since we've tried. But that show was definitely, I was flames on the side of my face angry about that. It's just like looking back on it now, that was, like 11 years ago. But yeah, we were quite upset, and I think we had to hold back one of the people who came to see us because she was fit to be tied. She was really pissed. Like, she was screaming at the guy to get off the stage, the singer for the other band. But they didn't care. So what are you gonna do?
That sucks. But 1:30 in the morning, ugh.
Yeah, I wasn't even looking forward to going on at 1:30 in the morning, but, we had people that had stayed there, and they still had a 2-hour drive back home. So it's like, I'm not going to complain about it. I'm just going to play, but, we didn't even get the chance.
That's a shame.
Yeah, it's a shame. Funny story, though. Then there's a big blow up on Facebook, too, because I was so mad that I just wrote a big thing about it, and you had people that were saying, it's not really fair. You should be saying that and naming names and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, why not? If somebody's being grossly unprofessional, like, why do you give that a pass? Why do you cover that up? Well, someday you might be in that position, but I said, look, if I ever find myself in a position where I'm deliberately screwing over another band at a gig, then I expect to be called out on it. Like, sure. I would never do that. That's just not right. But I guess I come from a different time. Like, that's the kind of thing that it usually doesn't happen in DIY shows because everybody sort of knows what the score is and they try to take care of each other and they compromise and they work stuff out beforehand. And, if there's a situation where something breaks and you have to, there's a delay, then you just work with it. You roll with it. And if that means we have to play 2 less songs, we have to play 2 less songs. And I just don't see that kind of rock star attitude stuff happening at those kind of shows as opposed to like club shows. And nowadays, like, every dive bar in a city that has a PA system, not even a full PA system, just a vocal PA and like a mic you throw in a kick drum, they're all acting like they're major venues. They're like, oh, we're at this club and we've had this band play. And it's like, dude, my living room is bigger than this stage area here. Like, what the hell? Yep. Where do you, just stop it? Like, there's plenty of clubs down there that it's just like, why? Now, some of those places are cool. I'm not gonna lie. I like the downstairs at Kung Fu Necktie. I liked Century when it was open. Well, Century's still there. Yeah, I like that. And then there was Connie's Rick Rack, which was pretty cool. That was actually that was a bigger space. But there's some places, and again, I'm not going to name them because I don't want to be mean to people who might, might not deserve my ire, but there's places that are just like, there was one place, they don't exist anymore, I can name it. It was called JR's Place. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It was tiny. It was so tiny. And we played at that place with Aether Realm and Wilderun and another band. I forget the name of the other band. I think they were called Burn the Empire. And you couldn't barely fit anybody else in there except the band members. It was insane. Like, it was so packed. If there would have been a fire, we'd all be dead. Like, it was the size of a small closet. I don't even know how they had patrons in there when there wasn't a band playing. I don't know what gave them the idea to start having bands there.
It's bizarre sometimes.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and I played, the basement shows are cool, but like, that's the thing. Like, you go into a basement show and you know it's a basement show and you hope there's a fire escape. Like there's a way out the back if something ever happens. But, you know, with bars and stuff, it's like you add a healthy dose of, you know, city drunks into the mix, and literally anything can happen, especially in South Philly.
I mean, it is kind of bizarre how, you know, you'll see, you know, as you described in the DIY sort of scene, at least you would hope that, you know, for the most part, you have people being cool and like treating each other respectfully and ideally no egos or anything like that. But then when you move up into like, let's say even like a low level sort of rock club sort of thing, it can be like the same kind of club space, you know, same kind of shitty PA and whatever. But because it's now a quote unquote legendary rock club or whatever, well, now you have like a pay to play sort of thing, or you have to, you know, all these other different crazy things that go on. When, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still the same thing going on. You know, bands playing in a small cramped space, you know, it's the same fundamental thing, but you just add like some unnecessary, like that's, it might sound stupid and kind of immature, but like, I do find myself thinking every now and then, you know, whoever thought, like there's the interview I think Nirvana did in like 93 or whatever, where they're talking about how cheap their concert ticket prices are. And then they say, oh, Madonna's charging $35. Why would anyone want to pay that? And obviously you look at how astronomical the prices have gotten since then. And I just find myself thinking, you know, I loved those frickin' DIY shows I would go to in college where it's like, okay, $5 at the entrance, you know, have fun. And obviously, yeah, I guess you can't make money off of that, but it's like, but it's, I don't know, something gets lost along the way.
Well, I think the goal for a lot of the DIY stuff, especially at first, it wasn't to make money. It's because you had people who were underage that couldn't play the clubs because they weren't old enough to get in there. They weren't old enough to be in there.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of states, you couldn't even be in the bar if you were under 18 or 21, depending on what state you were in. So people were just like, well, screw it. Let's just do our own shows, whether it's at the house, a backyard, a fire hall, whatever. They just find a space and have a show. That's where a lot of that came from. It was sort of, you know, it was kids that were rejecting that whole thing where it's like, well, the bands are there to draw people in so they can drink, and then it was a cycle that fed itself that way. And you know, kids are passionate about music. I mean, it doesn't matter what kind of music. You know, even kids today are passionate about the music that they love. So that's why they did it. They wanted to be a part of it, but they felt like they couldn't be a part of it. And back then, you know, for a kid, going to see a major concert was a big deal. It was expensive. You know, most of them didn't drive. I mean, they wanted to go see Madonna or whatever like that at the local arena. It was not really that doable for them. So they made their own scenes. They did their own thing. And that's where that came from. You will get like, you know, I'm not going to say there aren't any jerks in that scene, because there have been. Yeah, they're pretty much everywhere. But I think it's a lot less prevalent, or at least it was back when I was more of a part of it, than it was within the club scene. And you know, again, club being a very loosely defined term. I mean, yeah. Honestly, we've played at bigger rooms. You know, we played what's that place? I can't remember the place. It's at the Fillmore, but it's not the main stage area. It's the other place, the Foundry. We played the Foundry a couple of times. We played, you know, TLA a few times. And those venues were super cool. They treated us really well. I have no complaints at all about playing them. We came up, we got on stage, we got off stage. We did our thing. We didn't dilly dally. We acted very professionally because we've been around the block enough times. We know what to do when we play a big stage and in front of professional bands. We don't want to look shabby. So we did our thing. We got off the stage. We even got paid, and we just enjoyed ourselves and had a good time. Those places treated us really well, but we've had some attitude from smaller venues sometimes. It's just like, really, you're going to do that? Okay, whatever. I don't take it personally. People, there's just sometimes where it's like, if I get a vibe from a certain venue or promoter that is just kind of like trying to like just get that last nickel and dime out of you, or just kind of make you just take one more on the chin, you're just like, I don't really want to work with you anymore. It's just, I don't have, at this time in my life, I'm 52 years old, and I just don't have the tolerance for that kind of stuff anymore. I don't want to do it. I'd almost rather not play a show than go through that just to be on stage. You know what I mean?
Sure. It's kind of interesting though, because like there's almost sort of like a parallel with in general, just like the different levels of so like there's like the DIY kind of like basement show, which, I mean, if you want to have that on one side of the extreme, like a lower level sort of thing. And then there's like playing a more, established, I guess, Live Nation venue like TLA or whatever. But then it's like the ones in between where, it can get very, I guess, dicey in terms of like, okay, are you going to get treated with respect, or how is it going to work? Because like you can look at it the same way as, a young kid band just starting out. Most of the time you would hope they would be, nice to everyone and trying to have good attitudes and whatnot. And then you can look at like some of the big arena stadium acts where like a lot of them, well, I mean, obviously you're going to have some egos, but like a lot of them just genuinely, are happy with what they're doing. But then it's kind of somewhere in that middle ground where you are going to find like a lot of people like kind of just bitter because, well, they see other, people doing a similar thing but taking off. And I guess that same kind of parallel applies to these clubs, like them, I guess more like the smaller mid-level clubs or whatever, when you have like more or less, I guess, that club kind of jealous that they're not something bigger, not something more legendary, where they are putting on some sort of attitude, trying to make themselves bigger than they really are.
Yeah, well, it's a very competitive business. I mean, at some level, you're going to have in that mid-range between, even in the DIY thing, if you have, too many, if there's too many places or setups that are competing in the same area, I mean, usually they'll kind of work it out so that they won't have the same kind of shows like on the same nights or similar, so the same bands won't play in heavy rotation in there. I don't know much anymore how it works because I have been away from that for some time. But I think when you have a lot of like mid-level club venues and everybody's trying to stake out their own particular, I mean, they're trying to say, well, don't play that club, play us. It's like, well, do we really have to get involved in the politics of it all? Like, I don't want to do that. I want to play wherever I'm welcomed. But it's very cutthroat. It's very competitive, and not just amongst the venues too, amongst the bands. A lot of bands, some bands, and I don't consider myself one of these, but they look at it as like a competition, like a sporting event, and it's like, well, I think when we get to play live music in front of an audience, that's when we win, right? That's the win, because I'm doing this instead of working. I'm doing this instead of doing something I don't want to be doing.
Sure.
I'm having a good time. I'm entertaining people. I'm vibing with the audience and playing music and just hanging out and watching other bands. I mean, that to me is the victory right there. I don't need to be, I don't need to like, rock harder than Van Halen. It's like, I mean, I'd love to do that just because it's fun, but I'm not looking at it as, I'm going to crush these peons, like it's not like Jim and the Holograms versus the Misfits. And I don't mean the Danzig Misfits. I mean the cartoon Misfits. And that'll clue in listeners and how old I am because I'm making that reference. But yeah, it's not like that. Like you don't have to be at each other. You don't have to be, striving against one another. you can cooperate and you can just play together and have a good time, and then just do it again some other time at some other place.
Sure. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, it has to be for the love of the music.
I mean, why else would I be doing this at my age? I'm 52 years old. Most of my peers, most of the people that I started out in bands with around high school, into high school, like they're done. They're done with it. Like I know people that are my age and even older still doing music, but the older we get, let's just think about it. When I came out of high school, I graduated in 1990, and I could just swing a stick and hit like 4 or 5 people in my class that were in different bands. And I guarantee you, I'm the only one out of my graduating class from my school that's still playing music, original music on the regular. Most people just stop doing it after a while because they have life, they have family, they have kids. Some of them even drop dead. I'm at that age now where occasionally a friend of mine that I knew from back in the day, oh yeah, he died. Oh, wow. Just all of a sudden. Sorry to bum you out there.
That's all right. That's all right. Before we wrap things up, is there anything you have to promote? Is Frost Giant going to be doing anything new?
Right now, we're in the process of finishing up our newest EP, and we're still recording and tracking it, and hopefully it'll be out midsummer, maybe late summer. Again, I don't have an exact date on it because we're sort of self-doing it in whatever time we can manage. But we're on all the major streaming services. You can see us you get us on Bandcamp. It's at frostgiant.bandcamp.com. We have physical media that you can purchase there, as well as T-shirts and a bunch of other knickknacks, or you could just download the stuff or stream it wherever you want to, listen to it, share it with your friends, learn the lyrics, sing along, or just say, I don't like this, and change the channel. But hopefully you don't do that, because I want as many people to listen to this as we can, because it's fun. Like, we have a great time doing this.
Sure. And I mean, there's lots of great stuff in there. I mean, I have a Curse of Doubt on my workout playlist.
Oh, nice. You work out the blast beats? That's crazy. Oh, man. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yep. Hey, listen, it was a pleasure, talking to you, getting to hear some of your stories. This is just such a fun show to do. And, I'm happy you reached out and said, hey, I've got some stories for you.
Hey, I hope I came off, at least somewhat entertaining. It's the end of a long day for me. It's just, like I said, I worked 12 hours today, and then just, of course, I had the work thing at the end of the night. My job can be kind of unpredictable. It's pretty chill and cool until it isn't. And, so of course, this has been the second time I would have had to reschedule. If I did, I was like, oh God, I got to get this done. This poor guy's going to think I'm just avoiding him. And I'm the one who reached out to you. But yeah, special shout out to Jeff and Sarah from Mind Maze. I heard their interview on here. I thought it was great. And listened to a few of the other podcasts, and it was that you've done is pretty cool. I really do like the storytelling and hearing about other people's experiences throughout the years.
Well, thank you. Well, I guess that wraps up this episode. I don't have a good way to sign off. I haven't figured that out yet. So signing off. Gig Nightmares.
Yes, signing off. All right, man. Thanks, Max. Take care,
Yep.
man.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Gig Nightmares. Gig Nightmares is an independently produced podcast made possible by the support of listeners like you. If you enjoyed this week's episode, we would appreciate if you left a rating and a review for us. Gig Nightmares.